Hi guys, welcome to another video. Today we'll be making the cool UFO abduction scene that I just showed you. And we'll be using some techniques here. Basically we'll be using the Sapling Tree Gen add-on, which is free and comes with Blender. Besides that, we'll be using object constraints to get the camera movement that we want. So I hope you learned something, and if you do, then please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and click on the bell icon for notifications on future videos that I make. If you decide to make this yourself, then please send it to me on Instagram. I would love to see you guys work. And if you want the project files to save you some time, the download link is in the description down below. You can get it for a few dollars. Some assets you will need to complete this tutorial, but they are freely available. Let's get started.
So here we are back again in a new Blender scene. We want to clear up everything, so we hit A and then X, and don't forget to confirm. First of all, we want to create a plane, so hit Shift A and choose a plane. Now we want to scale this up, so I hit S and scale it up by a factor of 8. So we have our plane for scale references now, and we want to go ahead and work on the UFO. So let's add in a cylinder with Shift A again. I want to shade smooth with the right click, go into Object Data Properties, and then check on Auto Smooth. Next, we want to scale this, so hit S and then type in 2.5 in this case. And we want to decrease the height, so we're going to scale it along the Z-axis, so S and then Z, and then make it fairly small. And let's move it up with G so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so let's apply the scale with Control A and then hit scale. Now we want to tap into edit mode and select face select. Select the bottom face here and go into front view with numpad 1, and then let's scale this down, making it bit smaller, maybe moving it a bit up as well, creating the bottom of our UFO. Okay, so I hit the plane and I want to decrease the auto smooth angle because it's not working like it should, so I'm decreasing it down to 20. Now I'm going back into edit mode, got the bottom face here. I'm going to view it with 7 and 9 to go to bottom view, and then inset it with I. Now make it a bit smaller, something like this will do. Let's do that again. Something like this. Yeah, and once more. Cool. So now let's go back into front view with numpad 1 and extrude this out with E and move it down something like the same width as the above part, and then let's scale it in. And since we don't need it, we won't be creating the top of the UFO. Okay, so let's work on the part for our tractor beam here. Inset the bottom face again and then extrude it in with E. Move it up. Something like that will do. And now I'm just going to add some extra geometry to make the UFO look a bit more interesting. So insetting this face loop here and extruding it outward like this, and then selecting the face loop here, holding Control to move along the path, selecting the entire face loop, and then E to extrude them inward. Nice. Okay, now let's select the face loop here with Shift Alt and then go to Select and then Checker Deselect. And now we've got that going. We can inset these faces individually with I. Something like this. And now let's extrude these down as well and inset them once more. Okay, so make sure you don't click anywhere because it will make your life a lot easier. We're going to add materials now. So into the materials tab here, and we're going to add 3 materials. And first of all will be the base metal. So add a new material. Let's call it metal. Let's add a second material. Let's call it lights. And add a third material and call it tractor beam. Cool. Okay, so let's go into lights now. Change the type from principled to emission. Change the strength to 10. And then hit assign. And if we go into material preview now, you can see that worked properly. Now for the metal, we'll just crank up the metallic value and make the base color a bit darker. That's all we're going to do for that. And now select the circular face in the middle and assign the tractor beam material there, and change the type to emission as well, and crank up the power to 50. So let's go ahead and add a few more lights here. Shift Alt to select the outermost face loop and go into the select menu and hit Checker Deselect again. Now we want to inset these faces individually again with I, after which we want to bevel these, so hit Ctrl plus B and give them a fairly small bevel, something like this. Don't click anywhere again, go into materials and assign the lights material again. And this is all we'll be doing for the UFO. So we are now finished with that. Now I want to add in a modifier, in this case a subdivision surface, make everything look a bit smoother. Now it's starting to look pretty weird now, and we need to fix that. So we'll work on that. And we tap into edit mode and choose edge select here. Now we want to select all the outermost edges on the top part, holding Control to follow the path again. After which we want to hit Shift E to crease the edges, making them hard and giving us our shape back. That's looking good. I gave them the full crease of 1 in this case. Now for the edge on the inner part, that's looking pretty weird now as well. So let's go ahead and select that as well. And then crease that with Shift E again. Maybe turning it up to 1, maybe something else. Let's go for a 0.7 here. Yeah, 0.7. Okay, so let's crank up the viewport level to 2 here, and then go back into the object data properties and changing the auto smooth angle back to 30, making everything smooth. And now select the tractor beam face there and inset it to add some extra geometry. Let's rename our layers for a clearer overview. So let's rename the plane to ground and the cylinder to UFO. And let's add in 2 more things. Now, first of all, we want to add in a camera. And second, we want to add in a empty, just a regular plane axis. Now, let's move the plane axis up with G and Z, and I'm typing in 10 in this case. And I'm going to select the UFO here. And I want to copy the location there. So I'm going into the constraint properties and adding in a copy location and then picking the empty. And now, as you can tell, if I move the empty, I move the UFO as well. Now we want the camera to look at the empty at all times. And to do that, we're going to add in a constraint again. In this case, a damp track. Select the empty again and then change the track axis to -Z. And now if we move the empty, the camera is tracking it and the UFO is copying the location. Okay, so let's make a keyframe on the 90th frame here. So hit I and then choose location when selecting the empty. Now move the empty along the x-axis by -8, and on the first keyframe, let's create another location keyframe with I. This will give us a graph, which you can view in the graph editor. And in this case, I want to select the left keyframe here and I want to scale this to 0. So scale S, X, and then 0 in this case. And now let's select the right keyframe, the upper one, and take the left handlebar and then pull it out slightly, giving us a smoother curve, making sure the UFO slows down before it completely stops. Okay, so now let's go into our output properties and change the length of the animation to 210 frames and the frame rate to 30. Now I want to duplicate the location around the 100th keyframe, so I'm going to hit I again, not moving anything. So now for the first 90 frames, the UFO is moving, after which the person gets beamed up. So that will happen around 100, but we want the effect of the copy location to change. So I'm going to keyframe this on 90 here. And on 91, I'm going to click on the X icon and then keyframe the influence again. This will make sure that after 90, the effect of the copy location constraint is canceled. So I can move the empty, but not the UFO now. So let's add another constraint. So our camera won't move with the empty until we want it to. So let's add in a limit distance here and then keyframe the distance on 90 to 20. And the target will be the empty. And on 91, I want to keyframe the distance to 10 meters. Now, it won't move with the empty. And after 90, when I move the empty up, the camera will move along with it. So now let's go into camera view with 0, numpad 0. And let's move the empty up on the last frame of our animation until all we see is white. So I'm going to move it by something like 9.1 and then hit I again to create another keyframe. So now let's play this back. The UFO is moving, it's standing still, and now the camera is getting pulled in. Now we want the tractor beam light to be off before the person gets sucked up. So in this case, let's go to the 99th keyframe and let's turn the strength down to 0 and keyframe that. And on 100, we want to keyframe it on 50 again. Next up is our forest. First of all, let's go into preferences, into add-ons, and let's make sure the Sapling Tree Gen add-on is enabled. And now, if we want to add in a tree, we can hit Shift A and go to Curves and then choose Sapling Tree Gen. And this will give us a random tree. Now, we want to go into the presets here, which are down below here. And in the Geometry tab, and we want to change this to a white birch. Let's change some parameters here, and most importantly, let's change the tree scale to something like 5, more fitting of our scene. And then up here, let's go into leaves and add some leaves. So hit show leaves. In this case, it automatically adds 16 hexagonal leaves, and I want 32. Now let's go into armature and then check on armature. And this will add a armature to our model. And let's go into animation and then make sure we check on armature animation and leaf animation. And now if we play this, we have an animated tree. Perfect for our forest. Okay, so very important. I want to add the entire thing to a collection. So I'm going to select all the parts, make sure I have the leaf selected as well. And then hit M and add a new collection, and I'm calling it tree. Okay, so now we can hide our collection and we can select the ground plane here. And I'm going to add in a particle system to create our forest. So let's add in a new particle system and change the type to hair. I don't need 1,000 trees, I only need 30. So I'm going to type in 30 there. I'm going to check on advanced and check on rotation. I'm going into the render tab here and changing the render from path to collection. Now in the instance collection, we can choose the tree here. And now it adds all the parts separately and we don't want that. So make sure to check on whole collection. And change the scale to a 0.25 and the scale randomness to a 0.5, giving us some variation in size here. Now let's go into the rotation tab and change the orientation axis to global Y so the trees face upwards. So now let's add some materials. So in our scene collection overview, I'm going into the tree collection and selecting the tree curve, going into materials, adding a new material and calling it bark. Now I want to select the leaves object and add a new material there as well. And I'll call that leaves. All the materials will be available in the description down below for free. But first, let's work on our bark here. So go into the material there, select the principled BSDF and hit Ctrl-Shift-T to open the principled texture setup. And now let's go into my material library where I have saved my materials here. And I'm going to choose the bark material here, select all of the files and then hit principled texture setup. This will automatically create the material. Now the scaling is not functioning completely as I want it to. So I'm going to change it a little bit and go into the mapping nodes there and then applying 8 to the X scale, giving a bit more detail to the bark material. And it's not perfect, but it's fine for this purpose. I'm not completely happy with the normal strength here, so I'm tuning that down to a 0.5 instead of a 1. Okay, so up next will be our leaves material. This will be even simpler. So let's select our leaves here. So we can select the leaf material here. And let's add in 2 image textures. So image texture 1 and duplicate it with Shift D. Plug one into the base color and plug the other one into alpha here. Now let's go down into the material settings and make sure the blend mode is set to alpha blend. Okay, cool. So let's open up our textures here. I'm going to hit open and add in a leaf material. It's available for download for free again in the description down below. So add in the leaf color and then also add in the leaf alpha. And this is looking pretty good, but you can tell the leaves get cut off there because of the shape of the UV here. So let's work on that a bit and go into the UV settings there, making sure I solo the leaves here with the /, and then on the left side, making sure the white birch leaf is open. Now I want to select all of the leaves on the right side with A, and then all of the leaf UVs on the left side with A again. Let's scale these out with S and X, making sure the entire leaf is covered. I'm just going to move this top vertex here. And that should change all of the leaves to perfectly fit in my UVs. That's looking nice. Now I want to crank up the roughness ever so slightly, making them slightly less reflective. So something like 0.7 will do for me. Okay, so let's go back into layout here. Going into the camera view and then hitting spacebar to view what we've got going on so far. I'm liking what I'm seeing though, and I want to change the focal length of the camera a bit, giving us a bit more depth. So I'm changing that down to 32mm lens. Yeah, this is looking pretty cool to me. Okay, so next up we'll be adding our HDRI. So let's go into render view here. The HDRI will be available for download for free as well in the description down below. Let's change the type from color to environment texture and add in our clear starry sky HDRI, giving us the sky there full of stars. And I'm going to tune down the strength a bit. 0.5 is still a bit too much for me. Taking it down to a 0.1. I want this to be a dark night. Nice, okay. Now we have this slightly light horizon in here, and I want that to be gone. So I'm going back into shading here, and I'm changing the type down here from object to world. And now I can work on so hitting Control T with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled will give me the mapping nodes here. I'm going to change the Z location to something like a 0.3, decreasing the amount of light we have even further. Okay, cool. So now let's add in a sunlight to function as our moon. So back into layout, adding a light, in this case a sunlight. Go back into front view with numpad 1, and then moving the sunlight up and changing the rotation. I want this to be pretty low set moon. So giving it a big rotation there. Changing the color to a bluish tint, not too blue though, blue grayish tint. And then changing the strength here to, for now, let's set it to 2. Okay, cool. So next up, let's go into our render properties here. I'm changing a few things. I'm going to set these samples up, both for the render and the viewport samples. I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion, turn on bloom, giving us the nice effect there. Turn on screen space reflections. And finally, let's go into color management and change our look from none to high contrast. Now I want to go back into the particle settings for my ground plane here. I'm going to change the seed so I have a forest that better suits my scene. So I'm clicking on the random seed here a couple of times until I get a look that I'm happy with. And in this case, I think, yeah, that seems to be a pretty cool one. I like this one. Okay, so now I want to rotate the camera. So I selected the camera here and then hit R. This will allow me to rotate it to get a better view, and it doesn't affect the rest of the animation at all. Cool. So back out of camera view, and on the first keyframe, I want to start rotating the UFO. So I hit I and choose rotation there, and then go to the last keyframe. And in the object properties there, I'm going to change the Z rotation to 360 degrees and hit I again. And now the UFO rotates for our entire animation. Now I want to add in the campfire that you saw in the animation. So I'm going to add in a point light here, moving it, holding Shift Z to make sure it doesn't move on the Z axis, and changing the color to a warm value and changing the strength to 50 watts. Now I'm going to decrease the um, moon strength there to 1.5. And I'm going to go into the craft editor. And I want to work on the flickering of the campfire here. So I'm going to keyframe the power there on the first and on the last keyframe for 50 watts. And then hit normalize up there so you can actually see the keyframes in the graph editor. I'm going to select the first keyframe and add in a noise modifier. So open up N and then go into the modifiers and then choose a noise modifier. I want to restrict the frame range, start it on 5 frames and end it on 205 frames, giving us some relief there. Now changing the scale to something like 10, because I don't want too many flickers. Changing the strength up quite a lot. Change the depth to something like 25 and set the strength back up to 100 for more contrast. Okay, so for our final few things, we're going to add in a volume here. So I'm adding in a cube and scaling it up by 8. So it's the same size as our ground. I'm going to move it up with S and Z. Make sure everything is covered here. Now let's go into materials, add a new material. Let's call it fog. And remove the surface material there and add in a volume material, in this case a principled volume. And now let's go into shading and change the color here to a slightly dark, slightly bluish color, bluish grayish color. And let's work on our density here. Okay, so let's add in a few things here, a noise texture and in a color ramp. If you don't know how to do that so quickly, you can go into the add menu up here, choose a node you want, and then right click it to add it to your quick favorites. And then afterwards, if you type Q, you can add them quickly. So let's plug in our factor here and then the color into the density. Now I want to duplicate the noise texture and then plug in the factor to the vector there. And then crank up the black value by quite a bit. Change the scale to something like 10. Increase the detail and the roughness. And I want to decrease the scale on the left one, giving us this wispy smoke. Pretty cool looking. Just tweaking some numbers here, setting it to 2. I'm just going to crank up the white for more contrast and then make it darker. Cool. Okay, so now let's add in our tractor beam here. So I'm going to add in a spotlight, moving it up from the front view, making it easy to position, changing the size here to something like 15 degrees and increasing the power to 10,000. I want to go into the volumetrics here in the render properties and setting the tile size to 2 or 4 depending on your system. And this is looking pretty cool, but we need to keyframe the tractor beam as well. So let's go to our 99th keyframe here and set it with I to 0 power. And then on the 100th keyframe, let's add another one on 10,000 and then keyframe that with I again. And now the tractor beam gets enabled with the light on the UFO, and it's looking pretty sweet. Now finally, I want to work a bit more on my volume here. So I'm going back into shading and then cranking up the detail on the left noise texture. This brings us to the final part, compositing. So I went into the compositing window. Now I'm going to add a viewer node with Shift A and then search a viewer node. Move these to the right side here and plugging it into the image. Holding Shift and then right click dragging across will link these together. Makes your life a bit easier. Now I can hit V to zoom out, showing me the entire render image here. And I want to add in a lens distortion node and change the dispersion to something like a 0.05. Make sure to render a frame, by the way, else you won't see anything. And now we have a nice amount of chromatic aberration. So finally, for the render, make sure everything's turned on. Ambient occlusion, bloom, screen spatial fractions, motion blur, very important. Volumetrics, the tile size is set to 2 or 4. And the color management is set to high contrast. For the output properties, I have set everything to HD. The frame start and end are set to my entire animation. The rate to 30. Choose the save location that you want. And then go change the type to FFmpeg video. Make sure to go into encoding and changing it to MP4. And change the output quality to perceptually lossless. And finally, if you have audio, set it to AAC. And now we are ready to go into the render here and render the animation. Okay, so this brings us to the end result with the cool UFO animation. I hope you learned something, and if you did, then please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. It helps me out a lot. If you decide to make this yourself, please send it to me on Instagram. The link is in the description down below. See you in the next one.